Hello everyone, back tuning into today's second video. We're going to have a look at the weather for the next week to 10 days. For today's second video, that's going to take us around the 24th of January. And we'll be able to extend out beyond that the extended GFS and ECM ensembles over into around a couple of weeks. We'll have a look at CFSV2. It's back today. Have a look at that for the next 4 weeks at the end of the video. Talking of the month here, we have just released the ECM 30-day look ahead for the UK and the rest of Europe as well. ECM is continuing to forecast a very mild end to January and into February as well. But have a look at that, see what's going on. We'll see how the CFS compares at the end of the video. We're going to begin though with latest developments in the stratosphere over the North Pole and over the Arctic too. So this is how things are currently looking in terms of the temperature at 10 HPA. So grey line is a trend line, of course. At this point of the year, the temperature should be starting to lift up now, reaching its peak as we get into the summer. The black line shows how temperatures have been performing at 10 HPA in the stratosphere over North Pole through the season. Generally colder than average. We did go a little bit more than average there around the beginning of December. But other than that, it's been cold on average. Went very cold through the middle part of December. Real plunge in the temperature at 10 HPA down to under minus 80. We're currently just here. So we're somewhere around sort of minus 67, minus 68 perhaps. But we're under that grey line. We're under the long-term average, as you can see. Quite clearly. So it's been a cold winter so far in terms of the temperature at 10 HPA. We haven't really had any notable warming other than that little one that occurred at the beginning of December. But other than that, it's just been generally solidly colder than average. Of course, what we're looking for to generate northern blocking, or one of the things we're looking for to generate northern blocking, is a sudden stratospheric warming. That would be where we lift this black line up by many degrees in a very short space of time. Doing something a little bit like that, only the line will be straighter, but I've drawn it. So we lift the temperature up by around 40-50 degrees in the space of a couple of days. When that happens in the stratosphere over the North Part 10 HPA, then it can propagate down into the troposphere. From that, it can start to generate northern blocking. But at the moment, there's absolutely no sign of that whatsoever. And if anything, we're cold now to average. If we go a little bit lower down to 30 HPA, we're even colder. Look how cold we are at 30 HPA. This is closer to the troposphere. But we are still under minus 80 at 30 HPA, so we're down here. And I mean, the trend is up here. At this point, we should be lifting the temperature up now, going to around minus 70 on average by the end of January. So we're much colder than average at 30 HPA. We're not quite as dramatically cold on average at 10 HPA, but at both levels we are colder than average. And this continues, no doubt, to help to drive the polar vortex at its roots in the stratosphere over the Arctic and the North Pole. And this is indicated on this chart from weatheriscool.com, which is depicting the strength of the zonal winds. So loads of different kind of lines with this. The main one is the black line. So that's like the trend. At this point, the zonal winds should be starting to weaken. So we've already established at this point in the year, the temperature at 10 HPA in the stratosphere over North Pole should be starting to rise. As that happens, so the zonal winds begins to weaken on average. As temperature lifts up in the stratosphere, the zonal wind starts to weaken. What's actually happening at the moment, though, we're just here. We are almost at record strong levels for this point of the year, and a little bit more strengthening is likely to occur. We may set a date record somewhere in the next day or so in terms of the strength of the zonal wind for these days in January. The very strongest we've ever had with the zonal wind is just there, of course. But very strong zonal wind, to say the least. Now, what we can see is that after this peak in the strength of the zonal wind, just here, and that's going to occur in the next couple of days, I think, we're going to see quite a pronounced deceleration of the zonal wind, quite a pronounced weakening of the zonal wind in the next couple of weeks, probably because it can't stay at that sort of level indefinitely. So the zonal wind is going to ease off. The green lines of the GFS ensembles So we can see, but in around a week's time, we're back to here with a zone of wind, still stronger than average. In a couple of weeks' time, the zone of wind might actually be going a little bit weaker than average, just a bit under that black line, although, of course, that's extended range of the GFS and its ensemble, so it's unreliable. But certainly a very pronounced weakening of the zone of wind is likely in the stratosphere at 10 HPA over the North Pole and the Arctic in the next couple of weeks. Initially, next day or two, it's actually going to be almost at record strong levels. And then after that, we see a very rapid weakening of the zone of wind, so that in a couple of weeks' time it could be a little bit weaker than average. This may produce quite a pronounced deceleration of the polar vortex, at least for a while. You can see but just here, back into the autumn, this is November just here. So back then, the zone of wind did reach pretty much a record level, actually, for a couple of days in November. Then there was a deceleration and a weakening of the zone of wind to there at the beginning of December. So quite a pronounced drop in the strength of the zone of wind over a week or two. And that did produce a slightly colder snap, actually, at the very end of November and the beginning of December, and probably the coldest part of this winter so far has been like the first 3-4 days of December, when at least we generated some frosty nights before we went off and running into a very mild wet spell by the end of the first week of December, as again the zone of wind really strengthened and picked up and reached that very strong level by the middle of December. So anyway, at the moment we're really strong with zone of wind, almost record-breakingly so for this point of the year. We are going to see a weakening, if the GFS ensembles are right, we are going to see a weakening of the zone of wind in the next, or over the next couple of weeks. That could produce a deceleration of the polar vortex, which might slow it down for a while anyway, but there's very little sign at the moment of a sudden stratospheric warming. Temperatures at 10 HPA and 30 HPA are colder than average, and the CFS ensemble is indicated by these coloured lines you see. We've got 3 pink and 1 blue. They don't show a reversal of the zone of winds occurring until well into the spring on today's update at weatheriscool.com. So they're not producing any sort of sudden stratospheric warming and a reversal of zone of winds through February. It's not until March and even April that we see this very intense polar vortex finally dying a death as we get the final warming of the stratosphere that we always get at some point through the spring. This is how the GFS is forecasting temperatures at 10 HPA over the next couple of weeks. So again, we've got these blue colours indicating the cold average temperatures we've already established are there at 10 HPA over the Arctic and over North Pole. That is helping to drive the polar vortex and strengthening the zone of wind up to those near record strong levels over the next few days. So we just keep those blue colours going. The cold temperatures remain at 10 HPA and no doubt lower down at 30 HPA as well. That gets us to the 22nd of January, moving out into the extended range with GFS and the GFS run. We see that again we keep those blue colours anchored over the Arctic and over the North Pole. A little bit of a warming is occurring there over Siberia in the closing days of January. This gets us to the 30th of January, actually. A little bit of a warming of the stratosphere is occurring. But again, not reaching sudden stratospheric warming, not reaching levels, not reaching those orange and red coloured shades that would be indicative of a genuine sudden stratospheric warming. So just as we've had throughout this winter on and off, a minor warming of the stratosphere over Siberia, but certainly not enough to class it as a sudden stratospheric warming, and not enough to penetrate into the Arctic and North Pole itself and displace and dislodge these blue colours and lift the temperature up by the 40-50 degrees that we're looking for over the Arctic and the North Pole in terms of the temperature at 10 HPA. So at the moment, it just continues, and it has been all winter, with very cold temperatures in the stratosphere over the Arctic and the North Pole. We are at near record-breaking levels with the strength of the zone of wind. That zone of wind is going to weaken over the next couple of weeks. That might produce a deceleration of the polar vortex in a week or two's time, but that will probably be only temporary because there's no sign of a genuine fundamental change to the current position, which is a very, very strong and intense polar vortex. For that, we're going to need, I think, a sudden stratospheric warming, and there's no sign of that at the moment at all, but we shall keep looking. These are the GFS upper air temperature and precipitation ensembles next couple of weeks. We're looking at Manchester today, so red line here is a 30-year upper air temperature average for Manchester. We're still in the zonal spell, so we're up and down with the temperatures, having warmer and cooler sectors, but of course overall we're coming out milder than average. We see the temperature lifting up there as we go from the weekend into the early part of next week. That's as high pressure is building in. The exact position of that high pressure is going to be critical as to whether it's relatively mild and cloudy or whether it's clear and cold with frost under the high pressure. As we move into the last week of January, that's this period just here, extended range stuff, we see the temperatures returning back closer to average, but there is a lot of scatter in there. I suspect that scatter is kind of depicting a return of zonality, probably with warmer and cooler sectors. Perhaps precipitation-wise, quite unsettled for today and through to the end of the week for rainfall spikes. Then this rather extended drier spell setting up over the weekend into the early part of next week. Last week of January could start to go more unsettled once again. Temperature anomalies from the 14th to the 22nd of January are milder than average. We see above average temperature anomalies continuing, exceptionally mild again for Scandinavia, for northern, northeastern parts of Europe around the Baltic Sea, into the west of Russia. For us, our anomaly isn't as great, but it is above average. Spain and Portugal, though, are a bit colder than average in the week ahead. Precipitation anomalies from the 14th to 22nd of January near normal, still a little bit on the unsettled side. I would expect these are going to trend. I would expect these will trend drier in the next few days. That's how the GFS 6 o'clock operational run is looking for Friday. Unsettled, low pressure is continuing to rule the roost for Friday. So further showers, if not longer spells of rain. But over weekend, this is for change. High pressure builds up from the southwest. Initially quite cold air under this ridge of high pressure. So certainly Saturday will be quite a cold day with frost early and late. By Sunday, we're starting to drag up milder, cloudier weather around the northern and western side of the ridge. So England and Wales probably still quite cold, I would have thought, on Sunday, but Scotland and Northern Ireland already beginning to turn milder. And then this ridge sort of sits very close to the country for the early part of next week. At least it's breaking us out of the wet weather. But I suspect this is filling up with cloud due to the position of the ridge, just centred a little bit to our west. So it's probably filling up with cloud. Probably not all that much in the way of frost. Just very grey, dreary type conditions. If there is any frost, it will be most likely to be near the centre of the ridge. So that would be more southern and southwestern parts of the country. Definitely northern areas, I think, are likely to be filling up with cloud with this ridge of high pressure. The high increasingly moving back into the Atlantic as we go into the second half next week. So it's only a brief period of high pressure, and by Thursday, 23rd of January, for example, next Thursday, we're already starting to see signs of the ridge weakening, starting to introduce a milder westerly flow, and maybe hints that it's going more unsettled again. Let's have a look at day 10. So again, the high pressure sinking further southwards. We're returning back to unsettled conditions, but it would be mild. And then to more extended range, the Atlantic begins to crank back up again. So for the last week of January, probably turning more unsettled with a band of rain pushing through the country. However, there is a bit of a hint of a cold snap in the closing days of January. As this area of low pressure dies southwards towards Denmark, we start to pull in some cold and northerly winds. That could produce some snow showers northern parts of the country, but very quickly that's cut off as the ridge again builds up from the southwest and winds swing back into west-southwesterly direction. Proper cold northerly though extending through much of northern, central and eastern Europe, so that's bringing bitterly cold air down through many parts of Europe. Winter finally gets going across northern Europe, across eastern Europe as well, in the closing days of January. But for us, just a brief cold snap, and then we're back into milder conditions. Remember, that's very extended range stuff. It's 2 weeks away, so obviously it can be really unreliable. GEM looks like that. So again, Friday quite unsettled. Over weekend, here comes that build of high pressure. Now you'll see the high pressure is more centrally located over top of the country by the early part of next week. So the milder, cloudier weather is just nibbling into northern and western Scotland with that. Otherwise, most of us would be clear and cold. So the exact position of this ridge is going to be critical as to whether we can generate some frost. I mean, we're in the middle of winter, and it seems a bit strange that getting some frost going is a talking point. But that's indicative of how extraordinarily mild this winter has been so far. So that would be better for frost, particularly for England and Wales. But even further north, there could be some frosty nights on offer with that. Probably still quite frosty even into Tuesday. Then the high pressure starts to pull out to west. So by Wednesday next week, a week tomorrow, we're just starting to drag in some cloudy and milder air around the top of the ridge at this point. And then by day 10, while the high pressure pulls back into the Atlantic, low pressure begins to sink in from the northwest. Possibly, though, that's hinting at winds turning into the north. So I think all round the GM is a colder run than the GFS today. Definitely cold from the point of view of frost through the early part of next week. Over the weekend is the early part of next week. And then perhaps hinting at a cold snap by day 10. The ECM looks like that. So again, unsettled for Friday with further showers, if not longer spells of rain. Then the high pressure makes its move over the weekend, building in from the Atlantic. See, it's a bit further south with that ridge this time. So by Monday, I think England and Wales could be quite cold still here with frost, but Scotland and Northern Ireland definitely turning milder with that southwesterly. The exact position of this ridge is very, very important as to what the feel of weather will be through the early part of next week. By Tuesday, I think we're all starting to fill up with cloud and clag as the wind turns into the northwest, or the west to northwest, and temperatures lift up. That's how we look on Wednesday. Again, the high pressure just sent a little bit to our west. I think that's dragging a lot of cloud off the Atlantic. And then by day 10, we start to break that high pressure down again. It begins to slip away towards the Azores. Back comes the jet stream. Back comes the areas of low pressure. Starts to turn more unsettled by the end of next week. But at least it would be mild. These are the options are on the table within the ECM ensembles today for day 10, which is the 24th of January. So we have 17 members of the ECM ensembles with high pressure centred just to our west, bringing in a rather mild westerly type flow. Probably a lot of cloud coming in with that too. 12 have a high pressure further away to the middle of the Atlantic, and the low pressure is sort of sinking a little bit more towards our east. So that's a little bit more unsettled by day 10 and a little bit cooler as well, perhaps. That does include the operational run. So maybe by day 10, the operational run is a little bit colder than I thought. 9 have low pressure up to the north, and they're bringing like a westerly flow. That's more unsettled and milder. 8 have high pressure sort of centred over top of the country. That will be a mainly dry and frosty scenario. And then 5 with a high pressure just to the west of Ireland. Again, mostly dry, but winds coming in from west-northwesterly direction. Probably relatively mild, and I would have thought fairly cloudy there. In 2 weeks' time, these are the options that we've got. This gets us to the 29th of January. Have 33 members of the ECM ensembles, quite a majority of them, 64.7%. But actually look unsettled and probably mild, with low pressure dominating to the north of the country, bringing in the westerly winds. 18 just here are still westerly, but they have more influence from high pressure to our south, so that will be a drier, milder option. But it looks like all roads with the ECM ensembles leading to mild weather for the end of January. Finally, the CFS V2. So this is our CFS. We couldn't look at this yesterday, of course. CFS website was down. I think it came up more or less just after I finished recording the video, annoyingly. But anyway, we got by with what the Beijing Climate Centre with the Beijing Climate Centre model in yesterday's video. But these are the 500 millibar heights broken down into weekly periods. The first week period takes from the 14th to the 20th of January. The coming week has low pressure out to our west, high pressure, let's change the colour, is to our east. And so we're looking a little bit more settled, especially for eastern parts of the country. It is a more anticyclonic period, albeit how long high pressure lasts for is a bit uncertain. But I think it's a drier period, and temperatures probably, for a while anyway, a little bit cooler over the weekend. Into week 2, which is the 21st, 27th of January, then the high pressure pulls into the middle of the Atlantic. trough of low pressure sinks into northern parts of Europe, into northern Scandinavia. This is almost producing a cold snap, I think. It's almost bringing in a wind from the north. In fact, for Scandinavia and for northeastern parts of Europe, that may be a plunge of cold air from the north. For us, we're kind of on the periphery of it. So I suppose it could be a little bit cooler, but overall still with influence from the Atlantic. Then week 3 is the 28th of January to the 3rd of February, looking more unsettled again. Low pressure developing in the North Atlantic, high pressure sinking back towards Spain and Portugal and the Azores, winds going into west with jet stream. So that's just going back into unsettled, wet, windy and mild weather. And then week 4 is going to be the 4th to the 10th of February. High pressure then centres over Spain. Low pressure is out to the northwest of the country. Winds are back into west-southwest. So it continues to be mild and quite unsettled as we go into the second week of February. So temperature anomalies in the week ahead with CFSV2 actually near normal. It is a cooler week than we've had for a little while. Very mild, very warm actually over northern and eastern parts of America. All change in week 2, which is the 21st to the 27th of January. Most of America is absolutely plunged into the freezer. We, however, go a little bit milder than average there. Week 3 is 28th of January to the 3rd of February. Again, America absolutely locked into the freezer. Severely cold for most parts of northern, central, eastern America and going up into Canada too. We on this side of the Atlantic though, very mild. Look how warm it is over most of Europe. Same old, same old. And then we go through into week 4, which is before the 10th of February. It remains very mild in west of Europe and over much of Europe too. Still even pretty cold over America then, just moderating a little bit. But it looks like America's in for a really, really cold time of it as we get into the latter part of January and through to the early part of February. But we, on this side of the Atlantic, remain very mild. Let's just have a look at the precipitation anomalies. Lastly, so 14th, 20th January, near normal with precipitation, a little bit wet in the south perhaps. Week 2, 21st to 27th of January is also near normal for precipitation. Week 3 is a wet week, wet on average 28th of January to the 3rd of February. And then finally week 4 also hints at being a little bit wetter than average from the 4th to the 10th of February. So, as I say, it looks like northern and east parts of Europe, where it has been a very mild winter, it looks like their winter fate is changing a little bit. If the CFS is right, and they're going to be hammered by severely cold weather coming out of Canada, and also probably, I would have thought, a fair amount of snow as well. But for us in the UK and much of Northern Europe, the exceptionally mild winter of 2019-2020 continues. There's no sign of anything particularly cold coming up. We may generate some frosty nights over the weekend into the early part of next week. There's a bit of doubt about that, really. It just depends on how centrally located that high pressure is, but the evidence today suggests that high pressure will begin to slip back into the Atlantic through the course of next week anyway, reintroducing more unsettled and milder westerly winds from off the Atlantic. And that may carry us through to the closing stages of the month. We'll have to wait and see about that, of course. There is an idea that when Eastern America is cold, western parts of Europe will always be mild. But it's not the case. Actually, both sides of the Atlantic can be cold at the same time. We've seen that in various winters, such as 09-10, 95-96 was a very cold winter in America, and pretty cold winter for Northern Europe as well. The classic daddy of cold winters, 1963, was actually very cold on both sides of the Atlantic. So it can happen, but it's determined really by the Greenland high. You have to have a Greenland high blocking over Greenland and that sort of area, and if that happens then it can push cold out into both sides of the Atlantic. But of course we've not got any Greenland blocking with this. All we've got is low pressure over Greenland and a very intense polar vortex. So it means that whilst it's much easier for North America to get cold due to the fact that they're a continental landmass and all the cold has to do is spill out of Canada, it's much harder on our side of the Atlantic to do it without some form of blocking. So that's probably what's going on there more than anything else. Right, that's it for your videos today. Tomorrow we've got 5-day forecast. We'll have another week to 10-day update coming up for you tomorrow as well. But that's all for now though, and thank you for watching.